So, usually when you think about an assembly line, right, you picture, I don't know, a car factory.
Right, yeah, like spark plugs, steel
Mhm.
chassis, that kind of thing.
Exactly. You picture robotic arms welding doors onto a metal frame. And it is, entirely mechanical. It's totally predictable. It's controllable. And the whole goal is just sheer, unrelenting efficiency.
Yeah, getting the product in and then just moving it down the line as fast as humanly possible.
Getting it out the door with zero variations.
It's basically the triumph of the Industrial Revolution, right? You take
Well,
this super complex process, you break it down into these repetitive, isolated steps, and you just prioritize speed and volume above absolutely everything else.
right. It's a manufactured process. But then you walk into a modern grocery store, you stroll past the cereal aisles, you walk all the way to the back to the brightly lit meat counter.
Oh, yeah, under those harsh fluorescent lights.
Yeah, exactly. And you look at all those identically wrapped packages of beef sitting perfectly in rows, and you start to realize that this exact same assembly line logic, like this absolute obsession with mechanical efficiency, it has been forcefully applied to biology.
Which is wild when you really think about it.
It is. We have taken living, breathing ecosystems and we've tried to run them like a factory floor.
And that is a profound and, frankly, a highly concerning shift in how human beings interact with the natural world. I mean, biology just isn't a machine.
No, not at all.
When you try to force a living organism to conform to the rules of a manufacturing plant, something has to break. You just cannot cheat time in biology without paying a massive hidden price.
And that tension, that invisible factory line sitting right there on your dinner plate is exactly what we are unpacking today. We're doing a deep dive, pulling from an incredibly eye-opening presentation by Gary Brecka.
Yeah, this was featured on the Ultimate Human podcast, right?
That's the one. And our mission today is to completely cut through the confusion that hits you every time you stare at that meat counter.
Because it is confusing. I mean, intentionally so, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Because the true differences between grass-fed, grass-finished beef and the conventional grain-fed beef, which, makes up like 99% of the supermarket, it isn't just a matter of a few extra vitamins.
Not at all. Brecka isn't just handing us some boring nutritional spreadsheet here. He is basically demanding that we look at the entire life cycle of the food.
The agricultural machinery behind it.
Exactly. And the very literal biochemical consequences of eating an animal that has been, well, industrially engineered rather than naturally raised.
Okay, let's unpack this because we need to start with the core thesis of Brecka's presentation. It's a concept that sounds a bit like a tongue twister, but it honestly changes everything about how you view a meal.
Oh, I know the quote you're talking about.
Yeah, he says, we are not just what we eat, we're what we eat eats.
Yes. It just completely shatters that isolated view of nutrition we've all been taught since we were kids.
Right, because think about how we usually look at food. You look at a steak and you just see it as a standalone object.
You see 20 grams of protein, a certain amount of fat, maybe some iron.
Yeah, but this mantra, we are what we eat eats, it forces you to trace the origin of those specific nutrients backward up the food chain.
Because that protein and that fat didn't just magically appear in the muscle tissue of the cow out of thin air.
Right.
It was built from the animal's diet, which was grown on a farm, which pulled its components directly from the soil.
Meaning, if the animal is eating a diet completely devoid of natural nutrition, it literally cannot physically build nutrient-dense tissue.
It's biologically impossible.
Right. You cannot extract nutrients from a steak if the cow never consumed them in the first place. The buck starts with you.
Precisely. You are the final recipient of that entire chain of events. So to understand the true biological value of your food, you have to examine the literal environment where it was created.
So let's look at those environments, because Brecka paints a picture of two entirely different worlds. Let's start with the industrial reality.
The standard conventional method right now.
Yeah, the standard in America today. He describes driving past these commercial industrial farms, specifically referencing this 10-mile stretch in Kansas.
Oh, wow. 10 miles.
10 miles. Picture thousands upon thousands of cattle crammed together, standing out in the mud, eating out of these massive grain troughs.
It is an environment completely engineered for mass production. There's no green pasture,
Nothing green at all.
no foraging, just containment and constant feeding.
And the feed itself is honestly the most shocking part. We aren't talking about like a different type of grass here.
No, no.
Brecka points out the specific unnatural inputs being dumped into these troughs. He mentions corn, soybean, and get this high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah, high fructose corn syrup.
Wait, hold on. High fructose corn syrup to a cow?
I know, I know.
I have to pause here because that just sounds absolutely absurd. Why would an agricultural system feed refined industrial sugars and starchy corn to an animal that literally evolved to eat grass?
What's fascinating here is that the answer is purely about the economics of the assembly line. But to understand why it's so damaging, we have to look at the biology of the cow itself.
Okay, lay it on me.
So cattle are ruminants. They possess this highly specialized multi-chambered digestive system.
Like the four stomachs thing people talk about.
Exactly, and the most famous part is the rumen. The rumen is essentially a massive complex fermentation vat inside the cow.
A fermentation vat, okay.
Yeah, and is filled with very specific bacteria and microbes that have evolved over literally millions of years to do one very difficult job: break down cellulose from tough, fibrous grasses.
So they have an entire internal ecosystem designed exclusively for grass.
Exclusively. But when you suddenly dump massive quantities of starchy corn, soy, and refined sugars like high fructose corn syrup into that rumen,
Which a cow would never naturally find in a pasture.
never. The entire microbial ecosystem just crashes. The starch ferments way too rapidly, producing excessive amounts of lactic acid.
Oh, that doesn't sound good.
It's not. The rumen becomes highly acidic, a condition known as acidosis. It literally burns the lining of the animal's stomach.
Wait, it burns their stomach?
Yes. It causes severe ulcers, it suppresses their immune system, and it makes them incredibly sick.
So we are intentionally breaking the cow's digestive system. I mean, if the grain makes them sick, why on earth did the entire American agricultural system switch to this method? There had to be a logical reason for farmers to start doing this.
Like I said, the logic is purely financial. It's all about the acceleration of time.
Ah, time is money.
Exactly. Corn is heavily subsidized by the government, which makes it artificially cheap, and it is packed with dense, easily converted calories.
Okay, so it's cheap energy.
Right. And Brecka details the timeline here, and this is critical to understand. In a natural environment where cattle are out on a pasture eating their natural diet of grass, just growing at their intended biological pace, it takes about 5 to 7 years for that animal to fully mature.
5 to 7 years. I mean, that's a pretty significant investment of time for a farmer.
It is, but in the industrial feedlot model, by feeding them this high-starch, high-sugar diet, that life cycle is violently compressed.
How compressed are we talking?
The animals are pushed to mature in just 18 to 24 months.
Are you kidding me? 18 to 24 months, they're cutting the lifespan down to a third.
A third of the time.
But surely, I mean, just feeding them corn isn't enough to force an animal to grow that incredibly fast. That defies biology.
It does, and the grain is just the fuel. To force the biological engine to run that hot, the system requires massive artificial intervention.
What kind of intervention?
Brecka details this crazy cocktail of compounds used in these feedlots. They're literally injecting these animals with synthetic hormones to artificially stimulate rapid tissue growth.
Oh.
They use steroids to bulk them up far past their natural weight. And because that high-starch diet and the crowded, muddy conditions make the animals chronically ill, like we talked about with the acidosis, they have to pump them full of antibiotics just to keep them alive long enough to reach the slaughterhouse.
Along with various vaccinations, I assume.
Oh yeah, loads of them.
Okay, this is where that car factory analogy from earlier really hits a wall. Because if you speed up a car assembly line, right, you just get a car faster.
Right.
But biology doesn't work like that. If we are forcing an animal to mature in a third of its natural lifespan, what gets sacrificed? You have to trade depth and density for speed and volume.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like, think about comparing a tomato grown slowly in a sunny backyard garden. It takes all summer. It slowly pulls rain and minerals from the soil. It ripens in the sun.
Nothing beats a homegrown tomato.
Exactly. But compare that to a tomato grown in maybe 7 days in a high-tech hydroponic lab under artificial lights, pumped full of synthetic nitrogen.
Night and day difference.
The lab tomato might physically look red and round, but when you bite into it, it's watery, it's mealy, and it tastes like absolutely nothing. The actual essence of the food is hollow.
That is the perfect analogy. The industrial system is incredibly successful at producing a large volume of mass quickly.
Oh.
But, as Brecka argues, it is producing a fundamentally inferior, biologically compromised product. It is a hollow tomato, but in the form of beef.
Now, Brecka contrasts that muddy feedlot in Kansas with a very specific natural alternative, right?
Yeah, he's actually recording his presentation from a farm in Colorado.
Up at like 10,500 feet elevation or something. And he describes a completely different world, herds of cattle just wandering open pastures.
They certainly aren't standing in their own waste eating corn syrup.
No. He talks about looking down at the ground and seeing clovers, different native grasses, bugs crawling around that the cattle occasionally consume while grazing.
He is describing a biodiverse environment. And this ties directly back to that whole concept of we are what we eat eats.
Because they're eating a variety of life.
Exactly. Because these animals in Colorado are eating a biodiverse range of natural living compounds. They're going to physically embody that biodiversity in their tissues. The meat they produce will reflect the complexity of the ecosystem. It is exactly how nature intended them to live and feed.
So we've clearly established the two different life cycles here, the industrial machine in the mud versus the natural pasture in the mountains. But now I think we need to transition to the biological consequences for the person listening to this right now.
The real-world impact.
Yeah, how does that industrial diet of corn, steroids, and antibiotics versus the natural diet of high-altitude clovers and grasses actually translate into the meat you put in your own body? Let's unpack the biochemistry of this beef.
This is the critical part. This is where we move from philosophy to cellular reality. Let's start with the fatty acid profile, specifically the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids.
Oh, omegas. I feel like we hear about omegas all the time in wellness spaces, usually on the back of a bottle of fish oil or something.
Right, it's a huge buzzword.
So break down what is actually happening with these fatty acids inside the beef itself.
Well, every single cell in your body has a cell membrane made of fats, and the types of fats you consume dictate how healthy and flexible those cells are.
Okay.
The human body is evolutionarily designed to operate on a balanced ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. The ideal physiological state, what our ancestors likely maintained for thousands of years, is a 1-to-1 ratio.
1 part omega-3 to 1 part omega-6. Total equilibrium.
Correct. Total equilibrium. But Brecka points out that the reality for the average American today is drastically, almost unbelievably different.
How different?
The average American is walking around with a staggering 45-to-1 ratio.
Wait, 45 to 1?
45 times more omega-6 than omega-3.
That isn't just an imbalance. That is a complete systemic hijacking of our biology. But what does that actually feel like? What is the cellular consequence of having 45 times more omega-6? Like, why should you or I care if our ratio is off?
You should care because it fundamentally dictates how your immune system behaves.
Really?
Yeah. Omega-3s are generally anti-inflammatory. They cool the body down. Omega-6s, while necessary in very small amounts to trigger an immune response when you get a cut or an infection, are highly pro-inflammatory.
I see.
So when you have a 45-to-1 ratio, your body is essentially trapped in a state of constant, low-grade, chronic inflammation.
So it's like a biological fire alarm that just never turns off?
Exactly. And chronic inflammation isn't just a wellness buzzword. It is the downstream driver for almost every modern chronic disease we face today.
Like what?
It physically manifests as joint stiffness, brain fog, chronic fatigue, and over time, it seriously strains the cardiovascular system by inflaming the lining of your blood vessels.
Which leads to arterial plaque buildup, right? And where are we getting this massive, unnatural flood of omega-6? We're getting it straight from the industrial food system.
Yeah.
When you feed a cow corn and soy, which, correct me if I'm wrong, are naturally incredibly high in omega-6 instead of grass, the cow's muscle tissue literally floods with those inflammatory fats.
That's exactly how it works.
So when you eat the commercial steak, you are basically eating a concentrated dose of inflammation.
Which brings up a really fascinating point Brecka makes about how we view red meat in our culture. For decades now, we've been told red meat causes heart disease, red meat causes inflammation, avoid red meat.
Oh, constantly.
But Brecka argues that meat is often, and this is his exact phrasing, blamed for crimes it doesn't commit.
Oh, I love that phrasing. Blamed for crimes it doesn't commit. Explain what he means by that.
He means that when you look at the vast majority of scientific epidemiology studies that show negative health outcomes associated with eating red meat, those scientists are almost always studying people who eat commercially raised, grain-fed cattle.
Ah, I see.
They are studying the effects of meat that is pumped full of hormones, antibiotics, and massive amounts of inflammatory omega-6. The science is judging the unnatural, industrialized version of the animal and then slapping a blanket label on all meat, everywhere.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, going back to our analogy, if you only ever studied the health effects of people eating those hollow, lab-grown chemical tomatoes, you would probably conclude that tomatoes are terrible for you.
Exactly.
But you aren't actually studying a real tomato, you're studying an industrial byproduct.
And Brecka warns listeners to be highly critical of how scientific literature is presented to the public regarding this. He notes that you will often see articles or studies claiming there is no nutritional difference whatsoever between grass-fed and grain-fed beef.
I feel like I've seen those exact headlines.
You definitely have. But he strongly asserts that we need to look at who is actually funding that research.
Let me guess. The industrial agricultural complex.
Of course it is. If your entire multi-billion-dollar business model relies on the fast 18 to 24-month grain-fed assembly line, you have a massive financial incentive to fund studies that blur the lines.
Yeah, you want to convince the consumer that grass-fed is just this pretentious, overpriced fad and that the cheap feedlot meat is exactly the same thing.
Right. So Brecka is urging us to look past the funded studies and look at the raw biochemistry.
And when you look at the raw biochemistry of the uncompromised product, like the grass-fed beef from a biodiverse pasture, the micronutrient profile is honestly stunning. We know the omegas go back to a healthy balance, but here's where it gets really interesting.
The vitamin C.
Yes! Brecka drops a detail about vitamin C that honestly blew my mind when I heard it.
Yeah, ascorbate or ascorbic acid. Brecka highlight that grass-fed beef is actually significantly higher in vitamin C.
Which is wild. Because when anyone thinks of vitamin C, they think of an orange, they think of a lemon or a grapefruit. Nobody looks at a giant ribeye steak and thinks, yes, an excellent source of vitamin C.
No, nobody does.
How is that even biologically possible?
It perfectly illustrates that physical transfer of nutrients we were talking about. The cattle in Colorado are eating living, green, actively photosynthesizing plants and clovers, right?
Right.
Those fresh plants contain vitamin C naturally. Because the cow's rumen is designed to extract those nutrients naturally, the ascorbic acid transfers directly into the animal's muscle tissue.
Wow.
But a cow in Kansas, eating dried, processed corn feed, gets zero fresh plant matter, and therefore it produces meat with zero vitamin C.
That is just incredible. So we're getting omegas, we're getting vitamin C, but I think the most fascinating biochemical breakdown Brecka provides is regarding the B complex of vitamins, specifically vitamin B12.
Yeah.
And he frames it in a way that I had honestly never heard before.
Yeah, he does. He clarifies that vitamin B12 is not just some vague, abstract vitamin floating around in the ether. Biologically speaking, the core of B12 is a natural metal.
A metal?
Yes, it contains the trace element cobalt. He compares it directly to other essential minerals we know our bodies need, like zinc or magnesium.
A natural metal. Thinking of B12 as a metal just completely changes how you visualize your food. You are literally consuming trace conductive metals that your body requires to operate.
It's pretty sci-fi when you say it like that.
It is. What does this D12 metal actually do in the human body?
It is an absolute non-negotiable requirement for your nervous system.
Yeah.
Your brain and your nerves communicate via electrical signals.
Yeah. Right. Synapses firing and all that.
Exactly. Those nerves are coated in a protective layer called a myelin sheath. Think of it like the rubber insulation around a copper wire.
Oh, that's a good visual.
Vitamin B12 is crucial for maintaining that myelin sheath. Without it, your nerve conduction slows down. The insulation degrades.
So what does that feel like day to day?
It's the difference between feeling sharp, highly responsive and energetic versus feeling sluggish, numb, or constantly experiencing brain fog.
Wow.
And again, to trace it back, the cow gets the cobalt from the healthy soil, through the grass, into the meat, and finally into your nervous system.
So if we synthesize all of this biochemistry, when you take the animal out of the mud and put it back in the pasture where it belongs, the resulting meat has a vastly superior nutritional matrix.
No question.
It has lower overall saturated fat. It is loaded with anti-inflammatory omega-3s. It has surprising amounts of vitamin C. It delivers the essential B12 metal for your nervous system. And as Brecka notes from his own experience eating it, the flavor profile is infinitely more complex and satisfying.
Yeah, he says the flavor is simply your tongue recognizing the biodiversity of the animal's diet.
Oh, I like that. Okay, so the biochemistry proves that natural pasture-raised beef is vastly superior. The listener is convinced.
They're ready to buy it.
Right. So imagine I walk into my local supermarket, I stroll past the bakery, I get to the meat counter, I see a package with a nice rustic green sticker on it that proudly says grass-fed. I throw it in my cart, I pat myself on the back, and I head home to cook my healthy, anti-inflammatory steak.
To solve the puzzle, right? Unfortunately, no. If you do that, You have almost certainly walked right into one of the most deceptive labeling loopholes in the entire food industry.
A loophole.
A massive one. Brecka provides a flashing red light warning about how our food labeling laws actually work in this country. Under current regulations, massive commercial producers are legally allowed to label their beef as grass-fed, even if the cattle only ate grass for a mere fraction of their lifetime.
Wait, so the label grass-fed does not legally mean this animal ate a diet of grass?
Not exclusively, no.
Yeah.
All cattle, even the ones ultimately destined for those muddy feedlots in Kansas, usually start their lives out on pasture. They drink milk and eat grass for the first 6 to 8 months of their lives.
Yeah, okay.
Because they technically ate grass at some point during their life, the producer can legally slap the grass-fed label on the final packaged product.
That is the ultimate bait and switch. I mean, that borders on outright fraud.
It is incredibly deceptive. Brecka details exactly how this loophole is actively exploited by the industry. They start the calves on grass, sure, but as they reach that adolescent stage, the industrial producer needs to accelerate their weight gain to hit that artificial 18 to 24-month processing window.
Right, because time is money.
Exactly. So they pull the cattle off the pasture, load them onto trucks, and move them into the feedlots. This specific phase is known in the meat industry as finishing.
So they finish them on the assembly line.
Precisely. They are finished on the starchy grains, the corn, the soy, and as Brecka describes it, junk sources of non-nutritious foods. The sole purpose of this finishing phase is to rapidly bulk the animal up with cheap calories, marbling the meat with fast-accumulating fat.
And what kind of fat is that, based on what we just learned?
It is that highly inflammatory omega-6 fat from the corn and soy.
This is so deceptive. Let me use an analogy here to show how crazy this is.
Go for it.
Imagine you go to your doctor for an annual physical. The doctor looks at your chart and asks, "So how is your diet lately?" And you look them dead in the eye and say, "I eat a very strict, healthy, plant-forward Mediterranean diet."
Sounds great on paper.
Right. But what you intentionally failed to mention to your doctor is that for the last 4 months leading up to the appointment, you completely stopped eating vegetables and exclusively ate fast food, double cheeseburgers, and milkshakes because you wanted to gain 30 pounds as fast as humanly possible.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
You cannot claim the health benefits of your early diet when your finishing diet completely ruined your biology.
That is precisely what is happening to the cattle. The biological damage, the destruction of the rumen, the massive accumulation of omega-6s, the complete loss of vitamin C, all of that happens during the grain finishing phase.
The bad undoes the good.
Totally. Whatever minor nutritional benefits the calf gained in its first few months on grass are completely overwritten and nullified by the industrial finishing process.
So how does the listener protect themselves? We've explained the trap. What is the key to actually getting out of it?
Brecka gives us a golden rule here. A very specific phrase you must hunt for on the package. You cannot just settle for grass-fed. You must look specifically for the words grass-finished.
Grass-finished. That one word changes the entire legal definition.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
The designation 100% grass-fed, grass-finished is the only way to verify that the cattle grazed on biodiverse, natural pastures for their entire lifetime.
So no feedlots. Ever.
Right. It guarantees they never entered a feedlot, they never consumed corn or high-fructose corn syrup, and their biological development was never artificially accelerated.
Okay, so now the listener has the decoder ring. They know the science, they know the difference in the agriculture, and they know the exact word finish to look for on the label.
Yep.
But let's be incredibly real for a second. We can talk about trace metals and omegas and biology all day long, but when you actually go to the store and find that package of grass-finished beef, you are going to get hit with major sticker shock.
Oh, absolutely.
It is noticeably more expensive per pound than commercial stuff. And for a family out there budgeting their groceries every week, that price tag is a massive hurdle.
It is the single most common pushback, and Brecka addresses it head-on in the presentation. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, to understand his defense of the cost, we have to completely rethink how we evaluate the value of our food in the first place.
Okay, how so?
We usually evaluate food purely on physical weight and volume, right? A pound is a pound.
Yeah, exactly.
But Brecka introduces this concept of nutrient density versus caloric volume.
Okay, break that down for me. Because to my wallet, a $15 pound of beef looks objectively worse than an $8 pound of beef.
To your wallet, yes, it does, but not to your brain. Brecka dives into the clinical mechanism of the human satiation response here.
Satiation meaning how we feel full.
Right. We have to look at how our bodies actually register hunger and fullness. Most people assume that we feel full when our stomach physically stretches to its maximum capacity.
Right, like the Thanksgiving effect. You eat until your stomach is physically tight, so you stop.
That is a mechanical fullness, sure, but it's not true biological satiation.
It's not.
No. The brain is an incredibly sophisticated chemical computer. When you eat, the brain is constantly monitoring your blood for incoming materials. The true signal that tells your brain, we've been adequately fed, you can turn off the hunger drive, is not triggered by volume.
What's it triggered by then?
It is triggered by the brain recognizing that it has received an adequate amount of essential nutrients.
Let me make sure I'm getting this. It's like an accounting department.
An accounting department.
Yeah. The accounting department doesn't care if you hand them a giant, heavy suitcase full of blank paper. They won't clear the invoice until they count the actual valid currency inside.
I love that analogy.
The brain doesn't care if you fill the stomach with a massive volume of empty calories. It won't shut off the hunger alarm until it receives the B12, the vitamin C, the balanced omegas, and the bioavailable proteins.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. When the valid currency arrives, the vagus nerve communicates with the brain, hormones like leptin are released, and the hunger switch is flipped off.
Okay, but what happens with industrial food?
That's the terrifying reality of the industrial food system Brecka is highlighting. When we eat highly processed, non-nutrient-dense foods like that commercial feedlot beef, we're basically handing our biological counting department a suitcase full of counterfeit bills.
Oh, wow.
The stomach gets the volume, the physical stretch, but the cells do not get the nutrients they need.
So what happens? The accounting department rejects the invoice.
Exactly. The satiation response is interrupted. The brain says, hey, I know the stomach is stretched out, but we still don't have the zinc, the B12, or the healthy fats we need to run this machine. Keep eating.
It literally forces you to overeat.
Yes, you are starving on a cellular level while simultaneously consuming thousands of calories.
This completely rewrites the math of the grocery store. Let me put this equation together. Because grass-finished beef is exponentially more nutrient-dense, because it's actually packed with the literal currency your brain is looking for, you will physically eat less of it to feel full and satisfied.
That is the biological reality. You might easily eat a 16-ounce commercial steak because it's nutritionally hollow. You're just chasing nutrients. But an 8-ounce grass-finished steak will trigger complete satiation.
Because it has the B12 and the omegas.
Exactly. If you buy the cheaper, industrially raised food, your biology will force you to eat a much larger volume of it, just to desperately scrape together the necessary nutrients.
So you end up buying and eating twice as much food, which completely negates the perceived savings at the checkout line.
Spot on. The grass-finished beef has a higher price per pound, sure, but its actual value per bite, its satiation power, is astronomically higher. You eat less, you feel better, and you actually feed your cells.
And Brecka adds an optimistic macroeconomic prediction here, doesn't he?
He does. He points out that the market is entirely driven by the consumer. If more people actually understand this satiation equation, if we start actively hunting for grass-finished and just refuse to buy the feedlot meat, the demand curve shifts.
Basic economics.
Right. If demand rises, it becomes economically viable for more farmers to transition away from the feedlot model and move back to pastures. As production scales up, the law of supply and demand will eventually drive the overall cost of grass-finished beef down for everyone.
So buying it isn't just an investment in your own cellular health. It's a direct vote for a totally different kind of agricultural economy.
A vote with your wallet.
Exactly. Which perfectly brings us to a massive expansion of our topic. We've talked deeply about what this food does to your body. Now, Brecka forces us to look at what the production of this food does to the earth.
This is a huge pivot.
It is, and this is where we run headfirst into a massive culturally dominant narrative. For years, we have been told that all beef production is inherently destroying the planet. We're constantly told about methane, cow farts, deforestation, and climate change.
Yes, the environmental impact of beef is probably one of the most hotly debated topics in modern nutrition and climate science right now.
But Brecka makes a claim that will seriously shock people who hold that belief. He claims that grass-fed, grass-finished cattle, when raised correctly, are actually pro-environment.
Yeah, he calls them pro-green energy.
So what does this all mean? How does he justify that? Because the conventional wisdom says cows are basically the enemy of the climate.
He justifies it by explaining the precise mechanics of regenerative agriculture. He observed this firsthand at that high-altitude farm in Colorado we talked about. The key distinction here is that regenerative farming is not just throwing a bunch of cows into a field and leaving them there to overgraze until it's dirt.
Okay, so what is it?
It is a highly orchestrated, actively managed system of rotational grazing that mimics the historical movement of wild herds, like the massive herds of bison that used to roam North America.
How does rotational grazing actually work in practice?
Well, the farmer divides the pasture into smaller sections, or paddocks. The cattle are moved, sometimes daily, from one section to the next. And the critical rule, the absolute golden rule, is that they are never left in one spot long enough to glean the field.
To glean it, meaning they don't eat the grass all the way down to the bare dirt.
Correct. They graze the lush top canopy of the grass, and then they're immediately moved on to the next paddock. And this biological distinction is incredibly important for the health of the soil.
Why does leaving the root system intact matter so much?
Because of how grass actually sequester carbon and pull nutrients. When a cow bites off the top of a blade of grass, the plant's immediate biological response is to rapidly regrow to survive.
Makes sense.
To do that, the grass pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis, and it pulls minerals and water up through its deep root system. But if cattle are left in one place, and they repeatedly bite the grass down to the nub before it can recover.
The root system dies.
Exactly. The root system dies, the soil turns to dry dust, the vital microbes die, and the land just degrades into a desert.
But if they move?
If they move, the grass is given adequate time to rest. It explodes with new growth, and this is where the magic happens.
I'm listening.
As the grass grows back, its roots extend even deeper, breaking up hardpan soil and releasing exudates, which are basically liquid sugars that feed billions of microscopic bacteria and fungi down in the soil.
Okay, so it's feeding the underground ecosystem too.
Right. And these microbes, in turn, break down rocks and organic matter, making new minerals available for the grass to absorb. This raises an important question about how industrial farming is depleting our soil, which Brecka notes is a major issue worthy of its own discussion.
And while all this is happening underground, what are the cattle actually doing above ground?
They are providing the ultimate biological inoculant.
Meaning what?
As they graze, their hooves gently break up the top crust of the soil, pressing grass seeds firmly into the dirt. They urinate and defecate, depositing massive amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, and moisture directly back onto the field. They are literally fertilizing the very ecosystem they are eating from.
It is a perfect closed-loop cycle of life.
It really is.
I really want the listener to visualize this because it is the exact opposite of that 10-mile stretch of mud in Kansas.
Total opposite.
Imagine this system. The cattle eat the nutrient-rich top grass. They process it in the rumen. They deposit perfectly composted manure back onto the earth. Then they move to the next field. Behind them, the trampled grass and manure are broken down by dung beetles and earthworms.
Returning everything to the soil.
Exactly. The soil absorbs the rainwater instead of it just running off. The deep roots pull carbon from the air and lock it underground. By the time the herd rotates all the way back to that first field, maybe months later, the grass is taller, thicker, and more nutrient-dense than it was before.
And the topsoil is physically growing deeper over time.
It is a self-sustaining, naturally regenerating engine. Contrast that with the feedlots. I mean, to feed cattle in a feedlot, you have to plant millions of acres of monocrop corn.
Which is devastating for biodiversity.
You have to till the earth with massive diesel tractors, which releases trapped carbon back into the atmosphere. You spray the fields with synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides.
Which basically kills the entire soil microbiome and turns living earth into sterile dirt.
Right. Then you harvest the corn, truck it hundreds of miles, and dump it in a trough. Industrial feedlots are an extractive, destructive system. Regenerative grazing is a restorative system.
And Brecka makes a fantastic socioeconomic point here, too.
What's that?
He notes that the vast majority of these regenerative, grass-finished operations are not owned by massive, faceless, multinational agribusiness conglomerates. They are overwhelmingly owned and operated by small farming families who actually live on the land.
Oh, that's a great point.
So when you buy that slightly more expensive grass-finished steak, you aren't just feeding your own cells. You are directly funding small family farmers who are actively healing the environment and rebuilding topsoil, rather than handing your money to commercial monopolies that are destroying it.
It connects everything. It connects the health of the soil microbes to the deep roots of the grass, to the complex rumen of the cow, to the anti-inflammatory omega ratio in your body, and even to the economic survival of local agriculture.
It is a completely holistic approach to the entire food system.
Which brings us to the final necessary synthesis of this entire deep dive today. You have to zoom out one last time. Because while this entire presentation by Gary Brecka has ostensibly been about beef, about steaks, cattle, and pastures, the underlying philosophy, the core message, applies to absolutely everything the listener puts on their plate.
Everything. Brecka is advocating for a sweeping whole food philosophy.
Yes. The beef is merely the prime example, like the ultimate case study, used to illustrate a much broader rule of thumb for human health.
And Brecka uses a really profound concept to explain this broader rule.
What's the concept?
He says, very often it's not the food itself that is the problem. It's the distance from the food to the table.
The distance from the food to the table. When I first heard that, I thought he meant geographical miles, like the carbon footprint of trucking food across the country.
A lot of people think that, but that's not it at all. Let's analyze this idea of distance because it's crucial.
Okay, let's do it.
He is talking about biological distance, processing distance.
Yeah.
He is describing the space between the food's original natural state in the environment and the highly manipulated state it is in when you finally swallow it. It is the space where all the unnatural industrial interventions occur.
It's the assembly line. The longer the assembly line, the greater the distance.
Exactly. Brecka lists out the specific interventions that fill that gap, taking a whole food to go and turning it into an ultra-processed, food-like substance.
What kind of interventions?
He's talking about the chemical extractions, the artificial additives designed just to make things hyper-palatable, the synthetic preservatives designed to make food sit on a shelf for 5 years without rotting.
The pesticides sprayed on the crops, the herbicides, the insecticides.
Yes. Every single one of these interventions takes a food further and further away from its whole natural state.
And every step away from the whole state is a step away from nutrient density. It strips out the vitamins, damages the proteins, and introduces foreign chemicals that just completely confuse our biology.
It increases the distance.
So how does Brecka apply this distance logic beyond just the beef we've been talking about? How does the listener apply this to the rest of their grocery cart tomorrow?
He details several specific applications. For example, if you are going to eat seafood, the equivalent is looking for wild-caught fish, not industrially farmed fish raised in crowded coastal pens and fed artificial pellets.
Makes sense.
If you are eating plants, fruits, and vegetables, it means seeking out produce raised in organic environments, minimizing the distance added by those pesticides and herbicides we just mentioned.
And he mentions poultry, too, which is another area completely fraught with deceptive marketing.
Oh, totally.
If you think the grass-fed beef label is tricky, the chicken industry is a complete nightmare. What does he say about chickens?
He emphasizes a very specific detail here. He says, you are eating chickens, you want free-range chickens. But, and this is a big but, he doesn't mean the USDA definition of free range, which often just means a giant warehouse with a tiny little door leading to a concrete patio.
Right. Technically access to the outside.
Yeah, it's meaningless. He defines what it actually means biologically. The birds should be physically out in a pasture. And more importantly, they should be eating exactly what nature intended for a bird to eat.
Which is what, because most egg cartons proudly boast vegetarian-fed hens? Like, that's a fantastic thing.
Which is ridiculous because chickens are not vegetarians.
Oh, they aren't.
No, they are omnivorous birds. A natural chicken spends its entire day scratching in the dirt, hunting for worms, grubs, and bugs, along with eating grasses and seeds. When you force a chicken to eat a vegetarian diet of industrial corn and soy inside a dark warehouse, you're doing the exact same thing as putting a cow in a feedlot.
You're breaking their biology.
Yes, you are creating inflammatory, nutrient-poor meat and eggs. What we eat eats applies to the chicken eating the worm just as much as it applies to the cow eating the clover.
What I truly appreciate about how Brecka concludes this presentation is that he completely rejects the tribalism that usually infects these kinds of nutritional discussions.
It gets so heated online.
Oh, the wellness space online is incredibly toxic. It's always people screaming at each other about macros and diets.
It really is a very refreshing, pragmatic stance from him. He is not trying to sell a specific rigid dietary ideology. He isn't selling a branded protocol.
Exactly. He explicitly states that you do not need to be dogmatic about your diet to be healthy. You don't need to lock yourself into a rigid identity. He says you don't need to be a vegan or a vegetarian or a pescatarian or keto or paleo or an extreme
You
carnivore.
don't have to pick a team.
You don't have to pick a team and fight a holy war in the comment sections.
Because all of those diets, while totally different in their ratios of fat, protein, and carbs, can still easily fall victim to the industrial processed food system.
How so?
Think about it. You can have a diet that is 100% technically vegan, but if it consists entirely of highly processed soy isolates, synthetic seed oils, and heavily preserved faux meats, you are eating a highly inflammatory diet with massive distance to the table.
Wow, that's true.
Conversely, you can have a strict carnivore diet, but if you are only eating cheap feedlot beefs and processed hot dogs, you are actively destroying your cardiovascular system.
So what is the ultimate unifying theory here?
The entire focus shifts away from arguing about which categories of food you are allowed to eat and shifts entirely toward examining how the food in your chosen category was raised before you pulled it off the shelf.
It's about the source.
Right. The goal is simply a whole food diet, returning to foods in their original biologically recognizable form, minimizing that processing distance as much as possible.
And as he says right at the end, making grass-fed, grass-finished beef one of those choices, returning the animal to its natural ecosystem isn't just a subjective opinion, quote, that's just science. It is grounded in the inescapable biochemical reality of how our cells interact with our environment.
It really is just science.
So let's briefly recap the incredible journey this deep dive has taken us on today. We started by contrasting the horrifying, muddy, industrial feedlots of Kansas, the biological assembly line, with the lush, biodiverse regenerative pastures in Colorado.
We unpacked the deep biochemistry of the rumen, learning how a natural diet perfectly balances our omega-3 to omega-6 ratios, essentially turning off chronic inflammation.
We learned how pasture grazing loads the meat with vitamin C and natural nerve-supporting B12 cobalt metals.
We learned how to protect ourselves from the USDA's bait-and-switch labeling loopholes by obsessively hunting for the word grass-finished.
We explored the fascinating economics of our own brain's satiation response, realizing that the higher upfront cost of nutrient-dense food actively prevents the costly overeating caused by processed empty calories.
And we saw how choosing this path actively supports small farmers and rotational grazing practices that pull carbon from the air and physically heal the soil.
It is a complete paradigm shift. It forces you to look at every single bite of food as the final product of a massive ecological chain. But before we sign off, we want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over.
Something to think about next time you go shopping.
Yeah, something that builds directly on the mechanics we analyzed today, specifically regarding that satiation response, but takes it one disturbing step further.
Consider this. We just established that human biology possesses a hardwired satiation response, a chemical accounting department that automatically shuts off our hunger once we consume an adequate amount of actual nutrients.
Right.
If that is a biological fact, what does it mean for the physical design of our modern grocery stores?
What do you mean?
Take a walk down the massive middle aisles of literally any supermarket. The aisles filled with thousands of brightly colored boxes, bags, and packages. Almost every single item in those aisles is a highly processed, hyper-palatable product that has been specifically engineered by food scientists to lack those vital nutrients.
So that's dark.
Next time you are walking those aisles, ask yourself, is the industrial food system simply trying to provide you with cheap calories? Or are they actively designing products to ensure your biological off switch never flips?
Wow.
Are they mathematically engineering food to guarantee that you stay perpetually hungry so you are forced to keep buying more?
That is a terrifying and deeply necessary question to ask yourself next time you reach for a box off the shelf. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Our mission was to cut through the confusion at the meat counter, and I hope we've given you the scientific tools and the perspective to do exactly that.
Read those labels closely.
We encourage you to look much closer at the labels, to trace the life cycle of your food back to the soil, and to remember what you are truly paying for. Because the next time you are standing there at the meat counter looking at all those identically wrapped packages under the fluorescent lights, remember the factory floor. Remember the assembly line. You now have the knowledge and the power to choose whether you are going to fund a product of mechanical industrial efficiency or a product of nature. Stay curious, everyone.